Hit record. We are ready to begin for today. So first of all, if you're joining me here live or if you're watching on the replay, thank you for taking some time today to really just learn a little bit more about where your sugar cravings may come from so that you can really get on top of them and start living a little bit differently, right? So if you're looking to lose a little bit of weight or just improve your diet in general, maybe you're struggling with some health issues and things like that, this one step here in the grand scheme of things in a bigger process can really get you a long way. So today we are talking about getting rid of sugar addiction. And I'll explain why it's not quite an addiction necessarily, so that if you are looking to lose weight and improve your eating habits across the board, you're able to do that consistently, which we know is really the key to that long-term success. Okay. So you're in the right place. If you've been really trying to do this for a long time, maybe you've been trying to lose weight for a little bit and you feel like the overeating on the sugar and, having these really good days and then days that you're eating a lot of sugar are really holding you back, you're definitely in the right place. A lot of us feel out of control around sugar. If you see it, it's going to enter your diet, right? And so if you feel like you can't get a handle on those cravings, you're definitely not alone in that. You are in the right place today. And we ultimately want to feel better about including these things in our diet. And you'll find that we're not talking about cutting sugar out completely here and how to avoid it. That's not the goal here. But we can feel confident and less guilty about including it if we're doing it in a more balanced way as well. And of course, we're going to be talking a little bit as a weight loss dietitian. We're going to be talking about sugar management in terms of weight loss and that scope quite a bit here as well. So if you've really been working on that and feeling like you're trying and failing, that's definitely something that you're going to learn more about today. That's for sure. So ultimately, I want you to leave with really just an overarching idea of what it's going to take for you, not only to balance your diet out and to reduce the sugar cravings, but to really get a handle on weight management and healthy eating across the board as well. We're really going to talk about 3 specific things that you may be doing right now that are really driving your eating habits and driving you right towards the sugar as well. And I'm going to show you how to escape some of those things. So some very helpful tips just to tweak some things in a minor way, and you can see some big changes just from that as well. And I'm going to show you how to include sweets in moderation so that we can include them. I'm not just going to tell you you should, but how you go about doing that as well. So I'm going to show you the exact steps that I'm working on with my clients each and every day. I have one-on-one clients and I have intensive program for weight loss online as well. And so these are definitely things that across the board, everyone is struggling with. And so these are things that we're tackling each and every day, especially with Halloween approaching and all those candies in the stores becoming a little bit more difficult this time of year, right? So we know if you've ever been in a presentation with me before, you've done any of my 5-day challenges, that being on a diet does not mean cutting out all of your favorite foods. It's not avoiding sugar. It's not avoiding foods that you like, because ultimately that is not going to be a sustainable way for you to lose weight, keep it off, improve your health, stay that way. It's not going to be a long-term solution. You're going to miss those things. You're going to start resenting the diets that you're on as well. But what it does mean is that you have to have a strong vision and a belief of what's possible for yourself so that you can create a lifestyle around things that are going to help you work towards your goal. We're creating a sustainability piece. We're including these consistent actions that you can be taking on a daily and weekly basis. Balance out your life so that discretionary calories like sugars, for example, can be a part of the plan, but ultimately you're living a healthier lifestyle overall. Okay. So let's qualify you a little bit more here. Let's see if these things sound familiar to you. You feel like willpower is really the key to eating better. So you crave sugar and, more and more often you're giving in and you really equate this to a lack of willpower in yourself, right? You end up losing an interest in any sort of diet plan that you're doing 2-3 weeks in, if that, because you just feel like okay, I've been restricting, I've been being good for so long, I deserve something now, right? That's a very common mentality that we see in the dieting culture. And ultimately, you feel really bad about the way that things are going because there must be something wrong with you. Why can't you stick with a diet? Why can't you stick with it for more than a week? What the heck is going on, right? That's very, very common thought processes that clients who begin with me do see, right? Or maybe you are really just living on willpower and you're seeing the rest of your family and coworkers and friends just kind of eating whatever they want. And especially if they're like, they seem like they're at their ideal weight and their ideal health. And it's just like, well, why can't I just naturally eat this way and not have any issues, right? And maybe you say no thanks in public, you skip dessert at restaurants and things like that because you're quote unquote being good, but then you end up binging on sugar and whatever your favorite foods are later at home, and then you do so tenfold, right? That's a very common pattern as well. So none of this is to make you feel bad. It's really just to show you that ultimately here is where you need to be right now, because these are the things that we're going to talk about and how to alleviate that. And last, let's go through these. If you've ever thought that you could just lose weight by looking past the donuts, right? Maybe you had a personal trainer, maybe you had someone making food and meals for you. If you can just skip what's sweet and not worry about any of that kind of stuff, if you can get coffee and just drink it black and actually like that, and ultimately just have more discipline to avoid these things, that you would be successful, then you'd be able to do these things, right? You'd be able to lose weight. You'd be able to stick with healthy eating. You'd love healthy eating, and you'd feel more confident overall. But ultimately, the truth is that cutting these things out and avoiding them 100% is not the answer, right? You can't live in a bubble, right? Halloween isn't going to go away. The candy is still going to be there at the grocery store. The Girl Scouts are going to continue selling cookies, and coworkers are always going to bring something sweet in. And there's nothing wrong with those things. It's really unrealistic to think that total avoidance is the key altogether. Okay. So once we talk about what we're going to talk about today, this is going to really shift your thinking behind this, and you're going to be able to know how to balance the meals so that you're naturally craving sugar less. Imagine that. It's the way that you're eating and the things that you're putting together are actually driving you towards that candy bowl, right? You're going to know how to overcome the habits of eating sugar. So there's a difference between, your body craving things and that being a physical need versus having like an emotional habit or some sort of trigger that causes you to crave these sweet things as well. And ultimately, you're going to wonder why you ever felt so guilty about including these sweet things to begin with, because once you feel like you have a little bit more control over the situation, you'll see that guilt really just shows itself the exit on this as well. And ultimately, I want you to be excited about the changes that you're making, because if you're excited about healthy eating and learning some new things about the way you're eating and ultimately getting yourself on a better path, it makes it so much easier to commit and actually follow through on those things as well. So let's highlight and get underlined about the excitement portion of this as well. And ultimately, this is going to take a little bit of time because there are some mindset shifts that are required when we're talking about this idea of getting healthier and losing weight and still including sugar. In a lot of our minds, there's just like not room for both ideas. Okay. So just know that this isn't something that's going to just flip a switch and automatically you're not going to have any guilt surrounding eating sweet things or any of that. But just know that it will happen over time if you're putting these things into place. Okay. So we're going to talk about 5 steps, 5 key things that really do play into your sugar cravings for today. And it's really going to help you get on the path to success in terms of healthy eating, or if you're looking to lose weight over the next few months, this is really going to help you. Okay. But first, I want to tell you a little bit more about myself and where I'm coming from so that you can get a better idea of, how this has affected me and why we're talking about this today. Okay. So I am a registered dietitian. I own JD Nutrition LLC. I'm based out of Colchester, Connecticut, but since COVID, all of my offerings have actually gone virtual. So I do one-on-one virtual consultations, basically in a room just like this. And I also have a 12-week fully online course It's an intensive weight loss program for women. 12 weeks, 20 pounds is the ultimate goal. And we're working on things like this that we're talking about every day. Okay. So I'm also a mom. I have a 5-year-old daughter who started kindergarten this year. She's definitely keeping me on my toes between all of that stuff and her dance schedule and all these other things going on. I also find time for fitness as well. I'm getting back into running. I haven't run since college, essentially. And it's been kind of hard getting back into that, but definitely trying to love that again and making exercise a priority as well. And among all that, I say avid reader, but I read basically in my spare time, which ends up being like maybe a couple chapters a week at this rate, sometimes more, sometimes less as well. But it wasn't always like this. I'm at a point right now where I'm healthy. I'm at my ideal weight. I've kept it there for a long time, but that wasn't where I started. And I think a lot of people assume that because I'm a dietitian, this is health and wellness and, weight balance and all of these things have always come natural to me. And that is actually the opposite. And part of the reason why I got into this field in the first place. Okay. So I was overweight as a child, and it wasn't until my late teens, early 20s that I was able to really get a grasp on what was going on. And over time, I really taught myself some new habits. I broke free from this idea of yo-yo dieting. And I found ways to invest in myself so that I could reach my ideal weight. And after some years of fluctuation, I was able to end up staying there and maintaining, which is a project all in itself as well. So, I was going through these cycles of binge eating and then restrictive diets and all of these patterns that tend to keep people stuck. You're basically either on a diet or off a diet. And we know that this high restriction mentally is not sustainable for our long-term success as well. And so it did take some hard work for me to figure that out on my own, but I am here to teach you guys how to do this without wasting a ton of time on these things that don't work. I've done a lot of trying and failing, and I want you to skip some of these dead end roads and take the fast track to success. So basically, if you can learn from my mistakes, maybe you can get there a little bit faster as well. Okay. So that's a little bit about where I'm coming from. And so without further ado, let's get into these 5 steps here. Okay. So we want to make sure get through these in our full hour so that I can get my daughter off the bus on time. Okay. Okay. So step 1 is making sure you're eating enough. I'd say probably 75% of the women that I'm working with come to me saying, I can't lose weight. I must be overeating. Okay. But what's happening in reality is they're actually not eating enough overall. Okay. So we know when it comes to weight loss, there's really only one fact. The fact is you need to be burning off more calories in a day than you're taking in. It's a very simple in and out equation. And when your body doesn't have enough calories to be maintaining itself through diet, then it's going to start burning body fat, which is a complicated subject okay. But the problem here is that so many women are just taught to go on these extremely low calorie diets, and they don't understand that less isn't always more, because here's the cycle that happens. You restrict very heavily for a certain amount of time. Even just thinking about this over the course of a day, maybe you restrict all the way up until about 4 p.m. And then you get so ravenously hungry and just you're over it that you end up making up for lost time later in the day. So not only are you then making up for those calories that you lost there, you're so hungry and your hormones are so on edge at this point that you end up overeating anyway, right? And so you go through these periods of this restriction and then this overcompensating, and then the scale starts creeping up. Okay. And people wonder why this happens. And that is why that happens, is because of over restriction and not understanding how this restriction can actually affect your hunger hormones and all of that as well. So just remember that less is not always more. Taking in less calories does not necessarily mean that you're going to lose weight faster, right? So creating a modest calorie deficit so that you can be in a place where you are burning fat, but not excessively overstimulating your hunger hormones is really a fine line that you need to be balancing as well. And so in my 12-week program, one of the first things we do is set up a calorie goal that actually makes sense. And I would say that very close to 100% of the women that I talk to say, are you sure? Are you sure I should be eating this much and I'm actually going to lose weight? And, even just after a week or two, they're like, I guess you were right. Right. So, it's hard a concept to grasp that you should actually be eating more than you typically would on a diet like that. But it works and they're able to sustain it much longer and actually create longer lasting success as well. So, one of the big things that happens too when we think about this sugar piece here is that when you are excessively hungry, and especially if you've been going at this for a while, we tend to seek out simple sugars, aka sugar, candy. These are things that our body can digest really quickly. And when your body is hungry and on the search for energy, it's going to try to get the quickest, easiest thing, the thing that can get sugar and energy into your cells the fastest. And that is those simple sugars. So thinking about Halloween candy and ice cream and cookies and that kind of stuff, very quickly absorbed, very quickly hits the spot and sets your body into an energy balance again, which is ultimately what we want. We cannot wait for proteins and sweet potatoes to digest, right? We are going for it as well. And so when you're starting to get really hungry and you just cannot stay away from the sugar, you have this like magnetism towards the candy bowl at this point. And I'm sure you felt that before and you literally cannot help yourself. Your willpower and your mindset have absolutely no control once you've hit this stage. And a lot of people think that it is a matter of willpower and they tie their own self-worth to it as well, which is really problematic as well. And then they end up feeling really guilty when it's really just your body making a very predictable move to get energy into your body. Okay. So ultimately, you're never going to be able to reach that weight loss goal or even your healthy eating goal and just maintaining that consistently unless you're balancing your calorie deficit with what your body actually needs and steering clear of these hunger cravings. Okay. So when you balance your diet correctly and you have a modest calorie deficit, here's how you know. You're going to feel more comfortable between meals and snacks. And if you've ever dieted before and you've had this just like pit in your stomach all day long, and as soon as you're finishing lunch, you're thinking about what else there is to eat and, when you can have your next snack, and you kind of end up worrying about, okay, I don't feel like this is going to fill me up. How am I supposed to stay on this? And it becomes really stressful, does it not? So you're not going to be consistently thinking about food as well. You're going to be more even keeled. You'll be able to carry on with whatever you've got during your day. And ultimately, you're going to feel like you have a choice when it comes to the sweets around you. So if you were presented with a really delicious cookie right now, right at this particular moment, if you were more in control of these hunger cravings and you were still in a calorie deficit, ultimately, you would have a choice whether or not you actually went through with the cookie or not. Maybe you're feeling it, maybe you're not. Maybe it's just not your thing, right? But ultimately, if maybe cookies aren't your thing, but if you're really, really hungry, it's going to be your thing just because it's just energy coming in, right? So when you have this balance correctly and you're not thinking in that mindset, you'll be able to pass on certain sweets more often, right? And you may be at a point right now where you don't pass on anything, and that's okay. That's just your starting point for right now. But here's the thing. If we don't get this calorie deficit right, or even just maintaining a strict in-out balance and maintaining your weight at this point, that could be part of the goal as well. It's going to be really difficult to continue either maintaining a calorie deficit or maintaining your weight and just keeping things stable as well. You're going to start seeing that scale creep up because those sugars are going to come in. It's more calories, and ultimately it's going to work you in the wrong direction. And you're going to feel guilty about it, right? I'm sure there's no shortage of guilty around the sugar ideas right now. All right, so here's how to know. Here's a good way to get started with this idea. So your base metabolic rate is a good number to know. Okay, so there's a lot of these calculators online that take your height, your weight, your age, your activity level into consideration and create your base metabolic rate. So this is a minimum you should never, ever, ever go under. Okay. So this is the BMR is basically how much energy your body would need just to maintain basic functioning. Okay. So running your heart and your brain and your organs and all of that stuff naturally takes energy. So it's not just about how much you're burning off with exercise. Okay. I'd say a lot of women will take this number as their number to create a calorie deficit from. And that's where mistakes happen when it comes to signaling these hunger cravings and things like that as well. So just know if there's a diet plan out there that's requiring you to eat less than 1,000 calories, I have never once in my life calculated a BMR for somebody that was less than 1,000 calories a day. Probably less than 1,200 a day. Okay. So just put that into perspective there. So if you've been following something very low, and especially if you're adding exercise with this as well, just know you're really setting yourself up for failure in that as well. Okay. The second part of this is following your intuition a little bit and really just being mindful of some of the hints that you are under eating. So the biggest thing that happens is this overcompensation with your hunger cravings and things like that, and feeling like you need to be thinking about food all the time, obsessing over that, even in some cases, is really a good sign. And I think a lot of women just equate that feeling with this is how it is to be on a diet, which is horrible and horrendous that you would want to live that way. But if you feel like that's the only way you've been able to do it, just know that it's not. There may be very simpler ways to get this under control so that you can continue working towards your goal, but in more control of your hunger and all of that as well. And the third part of this is really getting help around this. So like I said, BMR is a good place to at least make sure you're at a minimum here and over your minimum goal. But what's actually going to work for you can be a bit of a moving target, and having someone to help you figure that out. With my clients, we're looking at food logs and we're looking at, exercise devices like Fitbits and Garmin's and things like that, so that we can get a better idea of what's going to work, so that you can save a lot of time, you can avoid feeling these over hungry moments and really keep yourself on track and get there faster. Okay. Right. So your old dieting intuition is going to tell you that less is more. And again, this is one of those mindset shifts that takes a while, especially if you've been dieting for a long time on and off. These are things that are just ingrained in your brain, and it takes a little bit of time to prove that wrong so that you can move forward in a more sustainable way as well. You probably also feel guilty for a while, including sweets into your diet when you feel like you've been restricting them for so long, and it should be that you're restricting them as part of your diet, right? And of course, only if you're eating only to that BMR level and think that's enough, unfortunately, that is not the case. If you don't honor these hunger cravings, it's going to come back to bite you. And that's what they say about mountain lions, right? If you encounter one, you're supposed to like act big and scary and like make a big scene about it, right? And if you turn your back on it, it's going to pounce. Well, guess what? If you're eating too little and you ignore these facts, it's going to come back to bite you in the butt. The same is true with sugar as well. Okay. So let's give you an example of how this works. So as I said, I would say most people come to me with these over or under eating habits as well. So Lauren is a great example of that. Love my Lauren. So she came to me, I think it was 3 years ago at this point, and she was a chronic undereater. And when she was on some sort of plan, she was doing it in a very low calorie way, like less than 1,000 calories, because that was something someone said somewhere along the line that she took to heart, and she just assumed that that was it, right? And predictably, after a week or two of that, her willpower would absolutely fail and she would fall back into these cravings. And she'd binge on her favorite sweets, which we're going to talk about more in a minute. But what we did, after a little bit of talking about why eating too little is dangerous, like we just talked about, it took her a couple weeks to really accept that and at least give it a try, eating a little bit more to see if that would help her along her way. So she put in place a slightly higher calorie goal, and her sugar cravings actually vanished altogether, right? So she had the ability to avoid break room things. And, she'd see it and she'd be like, oh, someone brought donuts in today, and just like carry on with her day, right? Which was like not a habit that she was able to have before. Um, and she was ultimately able to meet her goals too, because she was able to maintain the calorie goals that we set up for her, because she wouldn't have these periods of binging and restricting, getting in her way here as well. Okay, we're going to talk about Lauren a little bit more later as well, but let's get into key number 2, and that is waiting too long to eat, okay? This is all about blood sugar control. And so if you're here because you also have issues with, diabetes, maybe you have diabetes, maybe your doctor says you're pre-diabetic, or you have a family history of this that you're trying to avoid, this is really going to pique your interest here as well, because ultimately our our hunger cravings and our cravings for sugar have everything to do with the state of our blood sugar control. Okay. So just take a look at this chart, and don't mind that there's, a few different lines here and some other things that these mean, but just take a look at the trend overall over the course of the day. So you'll see down on the bottom going across, you've got the time periods for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and all the times in between there. And on the other side, it's the blood sugar level. Okay. Doesn't really matter exactly what the numbers are at this point. But what you see is that there are spikes around your meal times. So spike at lunch, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then you see it coming down and then leveling out down at the bottom before you see this other spike come back up. That is normal. That is what is happening. So when you are eating food, it takes a little bit of time for it to be digested. That digestion pulls out blood sugar. Well, it's just sugar, glucose that goes into your bloodstream. And as your meal is getting processed, your blood sugar within your blood is coming up, right? Which is fine. That is what is supposed to be happening. So then when this number starts coming back down, that signals that insulin has come by, picked up those sugar molecules, and is bringing them into your cells where they're being used for energy, right? So you see that decline as the amount of sugar left declines. And then at the bottom, that's basically when you're back at 0 again, okay? So what happens with your hunger during this time, right? So as your blood sugar starts coming down and signaling that you're getting closer and closer to nothing left in your blood to be used for energy, you start to get hungry again. So that's prompting your body to say, hey, we're almost out of sugar in here. We need more. Why don't you eat a meal so we can get that digested and get energy to cells where it needs to be? And then the opposite is true. So once a meal has been processed and your sugar levels are up in your blood, you'll feel less hungry and that system will shut off temporarily. Okay. So that's big picture how it's working. We're not going to get into diabetes at this point. But basically what we need to know is that your hunger is affected by these cycles, and that is something we need to really be paying attention to. So let's talk about where your blood sugar starts to trigger your hunger hormones, right? It's about halfway down this slope down, okay? And so you've had opportunities because your body is saying, hey, we're getting a little low in here. You've had opportunities to eat and give your body some more energy. And if you're ignoring that, your body is going to start sending out stronger and stronger and stronger signals until you finally get something to eat, okay? And it's at this point where you hit this really low dip in your blood sugar that you really start craving sugars, because your body is looking for the quickest, easiest digested source of food available, which is sugar, right? So if you are starving to death between meals and you are craving candy and donuts and whatever else you can get your hands on, your willpower at this point is non-existent. Your body has just primal mode taken over in these cases. And so when you feel like you have no willpower, it's probably that you're waiting too long to eat and it's being overridden altogether. Okay. So if you continuously wait too long to eat, you're going to struggle with this, because the hungrier you get, the more out of control your portions get, the less balanced your choices get. And it makes it much harder to stay in a calorie deficit for weight loss in these cases. Or if you're just thinking about the balance of the foods that you're putting in and health in general, it's going to be really hard to make good decisions when you could just run through the fast food line, get let's see. what can you get at McDonald's? Get a quarter pounder with cheese. That's my favorite, with one of the ice cream things, or a chocolate milkshake if they have the machine running, of course, right? And it's going to feel really easy to do that because your body just needs something, right? However, if you're considering this and really taking time to map out and time this better, you're going to be able to stay in a calorie deficit or just a balanced level without feeling starved. You're going to be able to get meal to meal without feeling like you're ravenous in between and that you just need to have food now. That's a really good signal that you're waiting too long, right? And in those cases too, you're actually going to be craving healthier foods, right? You're going to know what foods feel better to you and give you the most amount of energy instead of just gravitating towards the quick fix that's just going to get you that energy when you need it. And if you've noticed that your portions really get out of hand and then you end up feeling overstuffed after you've had this ravenous food attack, that's because, you're basically eating because it takes about 20 minutes for your brain to then signal, or your stomach to then signal your brain to shut off those hunger hormones, right? So in that time, if you're ravenous and there's food in front of you, you're going to eat very quickly and you're going to likely eat more calories than you need in that case as well. And ultimately, if you're avoiding, let's see where to go. These dips, I don't know if you can see my mouse here, but if you're avoiding these huge dips in your blood sugar, that means you're going to have energy and supply all day long. So when you're getting to this bottom point, this is when you're starting to feel tired and groggy and a little bit irritable as well. And so if you're avoiding that and you're eating, so you're keeping a steadier level, think of like mild waves at the beach, that's going to keep you energized throughout your day as well. And it's going to be much easier to skip that 2:30 feeling. I scheduled this at 2:30 knowing that's usually my crash spot as well. But if you eat well and you're well timed, you can be just as energetic at 2:30 p.m. versus any other time of the day. Okay. If you're not eating before you're ravenous, you're going to seek out these quick energy sources. Sugar. That is why we're here, right? Cooking and planning out balanced meals and waiting for them to be cooked is a thing of the past. Balance is going to go out the window. You're going to eat fast. You're going to consume quite a bit more. And then, of course, your energy is going to crash as well. A lot of women tell me they do have that crash after lunch, that 2 to 3 o'clock feeling. And just know that that's not really normal. Like having a small slump in energy is totally normal, but feeling like your eyes are getting heavy, having that complete lack of energy tells us that you're not hitting that time window correctly. And there's probably a balanced meal issue as well, which we're going to talk about in step 3 here as well. So how do we work with this timing? Everyone is going to be a little bit different, but a great place to just kind of set some roots down is aiming to have a meal or snack every 3 to 4 hours. Okay. So you can plan your day accordingly around that, and starting with breakfast. I know a lot of people are really into intermittent fasting, but especially if you're dealing with, extreme cravings later in the day, or you're struggling with energy, especially first thing in the morning and through lunchtime, breakfast is going to be key. That is a place where you're getting energy for your body. So if you're expecting your body to run well on fumes and caffeine, that's probably part of that issue as well. And what you can do too is just start monitoring your hunger and begin planning and cooking around that 3-hour mark. So if you're hitting hour 4, you're more likely to experience those dips in your blood sugar and then start seeing those negative symptoms as well. So having a plan of action and knowing what you're going to have is really part of this as well. So being prepared is where you might get stuck, right? You may know that you need to eat, but you don't have anything handy to make sure that you're actually implementing this process as well. And once again, this is where working with a pro is actually helpful. So getting this plan into place, having some quick and easy things to pull together really quickly is helpful. And what I do with my program ladies is we take a look at the food logs, and we're looking at meal timing, we're looking at what's getting put together, and we're assessing where these blind spots are. So 2:30 is a big one. We identify where overeating is happening, and we can kind of track back and see, okay, maybe you didn't eat enough and you didn't eat at good time intervals during the day. And if we try to adjust that, let's look at earlier in the day. Let's see what happens when we do. And that often eliminates overeating in those cases as well. Very few times does it continue to still be an issue. Okay. So this is a very individualized process because everyone's got their own balance things going on. They're exercising at different times of the day. Their work days look different, all of these other things. And so it is very important to get this right individually as well. Okay. All right. Let's give you an example here. So Andrea, she described to me that she was having these sort of out of body experiences around 4:30, 5 o'clock when she was coming home to cook dinner, right? So she come home from work, absolutely starved, and she just felt like she knew what she needed to be doing. Like we had been working together for a long time, before we really addressed this issue. And she knew like, okay, I know what I need to be doing. I know how much I should be eating, what I should be eating and all that. And she would have that in the back of her mind. But it's like she wasn't connected to that, and her body and her hands were just reaching for anything and everything in the cabinet all at once. Okay. And that's basically her survival instinct kicking in, and like any sort of conscious thought becomes obsolete at that point as well. And then she'd feel really guilty about it because she had such great intentions, and we created these plans and she wanted to really stick to them. And she felt really guilty for not, because she really had intended to as well. And because of all that, her weight just kept creeping up in small amounts because she'd have these periods where she felt like she was really on track, and then the overeating happening, even just a few times a week can change that balance and that trajectory of how your weight is balanced there too. So what we did is we really focused in on this meal timing, among other things, and made sure that she was more even keeled when she was walking through that door. Okay. So coming home too hungry is a recipe for disaster, which would be raiding the cabinets, basically eating all the ingredients for her dinner before she put it together, and then not feeling hungry for dinner, right? It wasn't great. So we put an afternoon snack in there before she came home so that her blood sugar could come back up a little bit, and she was more in control, and she was satisfied just cooking dinner. And by the time she reached dinner, she was, ready to eat. So just having a small snack in there and actually eating more in that case helped her to eat less later, which is, that cycle that she was trying to avoid. Okay. So ultimately, if you want to lose weight or maintain your ideal weight, if you're there, you have to understand that your natural blood sugar rhythms are something that can work in your favor. And if you're ignoring them, you're likely going to continue struggling with that for forever, basically, because your physiology is not going to change, right? Okay, so we ignored something here when we were talking about your meal timing, in that eating balanced meals and snacks makes it so you can make it between those 3 to 4 hour windows with ease. Okay, if you're eating just simple sugar, so let's say your snack for this afternoon is some Halloween candy. Okay, well, if you've opened the bag already, you've kind of set that cycle in motion, and it's still a week and a half away, right? So let's see what happens here. So if you're eating meals that are high in sugar, your body is very good at digesting them, like we know. And so it's going to use it very quickly. And then you're going to be back in that sugar crash period very quickly, right? And so if you're hoping that snack gets you 3 to 4 hours until dinner, it's a lost cause. It's not going to happen, right? So we know that eating the right combinations of food are going to help us feel satisfied longer. And if you're feeling too hungry to make it through those windows, it's going to be really impossible to stick with a calorie goal, because you're going to be constantly looking for that energy boost as well. So let's take a look at this chart, right? So this is something that we've talked about. Let's really drive this one home here. Look at your orange bar here, your carbohydrates. We're going to say simple sugars here because there is a bit of a difference. This is not just so black and white, but let's think about things like, your Halloween candy, cookies, sugary cereals, bagels, crackers, that kind of stuff. There's not a lot there except for the carbohydrates. And if you're to look at the food label on the box of crackers that you're eating, for example, you'll see that there's probably at least like 30 grams of carbs in there. And if you look at how much protein and how much fat and how much fiber there is, it's probably significantly less, right? Very minimal in that, right? So basically that only means that it's a very good source of energy for your body. It's going to get where it needs to go very quickly. Okay. But you'll see in this chart that happens, but then you see this big spike down again, right? So by hour 4, you're really down in the dumps and you're feeling that ravenous hunger again, okay? But here's where you can manipulate the system a little bit here. Look at your fat and your protein on here. They are such complex molecules that it takes much longer for your digestive system and the enzymes that are there to break them down into the energy that they contain. Okay. So you'll see that you get a really steady increase of your blood sugar at hours 3 and 4, right? When you've already peaked on your digestion of your carbohydrates very quickly. So what we can do then is make use of this fact that, if you're putting these things together, your body's not going to be able to get towards the carbs and digest them very quickly because you're also sorting through protein and fat molecules in the process as well. So it slows down the absorption of the carbohydrates. Okay. So we need to make sure that we're staying satisfied longer by pairing any sort of simple carb that we have with either a protein or a fat. And that is going to help us get to that 3 to 4 hour mark. Okay. The second part of this too is fiber. Okay. So fiber you do find in carbohydrate rich foods. Okay. So not all carbs are created equal, which I'm sure you know. Fiber is not absorbed at all, but it still has to get processed through your body. And so while your body is deciding like, all right, there's all this fiber in here, can we use it or not? It's keeping that carb from being absorbed as quickly. And so you're getting a steadier release of that energy, just as if you were to pair it with either a fat or a protein. Okay. So if you're choosing carbs, this is where people lose their minds when they say, oh, I can't eat carbs. Well, yes, you can. If you have one that is higher in fiber, it's definitely going to work in your favor, right? So we want to make sure that you're utilizing these aspects so that you're getting the most out of your food, so that you're staying fuller, so you can eat less ultimately and keep that calorie balance as is. Okay. All right. So when you do this well, okay, you're going to feel more satisfied between meals. You're not going to see these highs and lows and these energy crashes during the day because your blood sugar is going to steadily decline in a more controlled way. And it's not going to lead to such ravenous cravings in between as well. All in all, that's going to make it much easier to stick with your healthy eating plan, whether you're just eating healthy or trying to lose weight as well. And really, ultimately, you're going to be getting a better variety of nutrients because you're not just focusing on those quick carb energy sources. You're going to get proteins, you're going to get healthy fats, you're going to get fiber and phytonutrients and antioxidants and all of these other things because the quality of your food is going to be changing a little bit here as well. And then the opposite is also true. If you don't do this, you're going to be experiencing this hunger immediately after eating. So if you're having a donut for lunch, expect to be hungry in a half an hour, right? You're going to struggle then to stay within a calorie deficit because how many calories is a donut? Like 500, right? And then you're hungry again an hour later. It's just, you're stacking that on top of it. It's going to be very difficult to maintain that balance. Let's see, your blood sugar will drop rapidly and have you searching for sweets. Yes, that is why we crave sweets, is when we're seeing this really quick decline. Your body thinks it's in trouble and therefore seeks out those simple carbs. Okay. If you are a client of mine or a past client of mine, you have seen this chart 1,000 times. Okay. So here is a basic idea of how to balance your plate so that you can make use of everything we just talked about. So if your mind is like a little like, oh, that was a lot of info, like how do I actually use that? Here's how without a whole lot of thought. Make half of your plate some sort of vegetable or fruit, especially if you are maintaining your weight, you can certainly put fruit here as well. And then balancing out the heavier foods that you're eating, the more calorie dense, I'll say, your carbs and your proteins on the other side. Okay. Biggest thing to note here is that orange category, the carbs, including all those simple sugars that you like, is most likely going to be a much smaller wedge than something that you're putting together now. Okay. And so if you're focusing more in the proteins and then your non-starchy vegetables, it's going to make it so you can eat the carbs, but you're naturally inclined to eat less of them. Okay. So this is how you feel satisfied, undeprived, without, sacrificing all of these other things, right? So that's the general gist of it. And so focusing on the fiber rich carbs too when you're choosing this. So things like brown rice, whole wheat pasta, chickpea pasta is really good too. Lots of fiber in there too. Sweet potatoes versus regular potatoes, there's a little bit more fiber, a little bit more nutrients there as well. Fruit is also a good one in there for that natural sweetness as well. So you can still get a little bit of a kick of that too. Okay. Now with your snacks, the same sort of balance applies, but you're not necessarily going to hit so many food groups in there as well. So the basic rule for this is never having a carb by itself. Okay. So pairing examples, banana, crackers, chips, candy. Those are all your simpler carbs or your carbohydrate source in general. Some of them have fiber in there as well. And then you're going to pair those with some sort of protein or some sort of fat to make sure that you're lengthening the time for that to be absorbed in that amount of energy that you have. So things like peanut butter, cheese, avocado, so like guacamole, nuts, like having mixed nuts, almonds, peanuts, that kind of stuff. Those are all great ways to pair things so your snack sticks with you a little bit longer. Okay. Naturally, there are places where you're going to get stuck, which is not having any idea what any of that means in there as well. Listen, I was in school for 5 years and, I still don't know everything that's on these food lists necessarily. So it can be hard to categorize what's a carb, what's a fat, what's a protein, if you're not familiar with this kind of stuff, right? So, having some guidance to figure this out is really the key in here, and having some help with meal planning and really getting an understanding of what this is so that you can really give it a good try, see it working, and then continue down that path is really ideal for your success as well. So I did create a quick sweet snack guide to help with choices for your meal sweets and take some pressure off of you there. So you'll check that in your follow-up email as well. But ultimately, it's really just a stepping stone to getting some more information on that as well. Now, let's talk about Lauren again. So I failed to mention with you guys the other time that Lauren had a donut a day addiction. She was at Dunkin' Donuts like it was her job every single morning. Okay. So when we started working together, first of all, she admitted to me that she put off her appointment for a few months because she wasn't ready to give anything up, which is a very common thing to think when you feel like you're going to be put on a diet when you see a dietitian, right? And she had insisted that like she had to avoid them altogether. She really tried to avoid them as well. And in fact, this problem really didn't even come into play. She didn't even tell me about this until a couple months in, and then we kind of discovered that she was struggling with this, right? Because she felt guilty. Like she knew she shouldn't be eating a donut a day. It wasn't doing her any favors in that case. And so she really didn't even want to bring it up. It's actually a pretty common thing is when I meet with someone for the first time, they try to tell me about, all the things they're doing right and how they love healthy foods and broccoli is their favorite and all of these things. And I'm like, all right, well, if that was, if you're eating in a very balanced way and, you've got all these things under wraps, then why are we talking about this, right? There's always something going on in the background, right? And that's fine. But honesty is the best policy here so we can get to the root causes of some of these issues a little bit faster than what we did with Lauren. So slap on the wrist for her. But anyway, she had this one a day donut addiction. She was trying to hide. She was really trying to avoid it. And ultimately, she tied her ability to restrict herself and restrain herself from donuts with her self-worth, right? And inevitably, she'd give in and have a donut and feel horrible about herself, right? It's a common cycle. We have this emotional eating cycle, and we do put a lot of self-worth around this as well. And of course, she wasn't then making any progress with her weight loss because her blood sugar was out of control. She wasn't able to stay in control of her hunger and stay within the goals that we had set up for her. So she'd inevitably rebound during these episodes, right? She was trying really hard, but just ultimately spinning her wheel. So what we did is, we focused on that breakfast piece. That was that time that she was really reaching for the donuts just to get a quick fix before work, right? So we really we made her have breakfast for one. She was not a breakfast person, so we made sure she gave it a good try and just to see what would happen. We made sure that her meals and snacks were balanced throughout the day so that she could be more even keeled with her blood sugar. And so she wasn't, not hitting it up in the morning and also not stopping there on the way home from work in the afternoon as well. And because we were able to eliminate that craving for the most part, not 100%, never goes away 100%, she was able to lose about 30 pounds in 6 months just by following some really basic things with her meal timing and that food balance as well. All right, so these have been some foundational things that we've talked about, but let's really dive into how to deal with sugar in the present tense. Okay, so we can certainly be working on healthier eating and balance in the background, but what you'll notice is that we haven't talked about lower sugar things, no low sugar recipes, no sugar free alternatives, no aspartame, no stevia, none of that today. Okay, so a lasting successful diet requires that we include our favorite foods, and that means not modified versions of them, right? So if you've been making some sugar-free version of your favorite dessert and it's not quite hitting the spot, it's because it's not the same, okay? And really, there's no reason that we have to be doing that as well. We do need to consider too that some of the foods that you may be choosing for these sweets, and we'll just say Halloween candy because we were right there in that season, they don't provide a lot of nutritional value. It really is just sugar without really any vitamins or minerals or any other redeeming qualities. But that does not mean that they don't have benefit. Okay. We have to remember that humans are not only eating for physical energy, but there's also emotional connections. There is a social benefit to this as well. And the idea of just removing that removes basically a piece of our soul. Is that being too dramatic? Maybe, but there are these other connections. And so if you feel like you should just be eating for energy, that's not really the human condition, is it? So what we can do then is allow sweets a place in our diet so that we don't have to feel so guilty about it. And we don't have to have this urgency to eat them, like this idea of like, oh, if I never get this sweet again, I'm never going to be able to have it because I'm starting a diet next week, and like all these other thoughts that go around that as well. Okay. So we're going to talk about the balance of some of these trigger foods that you experience here in a few minutes, but just ultimately know that it's going to be really difficult for you to reach your weight loss goals or maintain your weight unless you're including your favorite foods in your diet, because restriction psychologically backfires on you, right? You're going to quickly become resentful of the diet plan that you're following, especially if you're in maintenance mode and you're like, what, I've reached my goal and I can't eat what I want now? Like, no, thank you. And then, if you're going to be restricting those foods indefinitely, we can just forget about that diet plan altogether. Okay. So allowing sweets in here sounds very foreign and wrong, and you can go ahead and roll your eyes all you want, but give it a try and see what happens for you. But just remember the benefits of this. We can enjoy the simple pleasures in life, just like having a piece of chocolate, how joyful that can feel. And that is because dopamine is being released in those situations. It's actually making you happy. Okay. We can then take part in social events like having birthday cake and celebrating holidays like Christmas cookies and having apple pie at Thanksgiving and having Halloween candy at Halloween. That's something, an allowance that we should have, right? And ultimately it does connect us to happiness. So, foods and memories are connected as well. And so if you're being nostalgic about something that happened in the past, one of the easiest ways to bring that up is with taste and with smell. Okay. So we cannot ignore that this is all happening in the background as well. So here's where you may be already. Okay. So you may feel guilty when you're eating foods like this. Okay. Especially if you are overeating them in some cases as well. You may not think that it's possible to maintain a weight loss effort or maintaining your weight with including sweets in there, because every time you've included sweets in your diet before, you gained weight. Okay. Maybe you've never been able to cut them out for good, but it's because of all those reasons we just talked about. And you really don't know how to incorporate those sweets without overdoing it in these cases. And that oftentimes is a big mindset issue that needs to happen too. So first things first is when you are eating something sweet, clear your calendar, make it the only thing that you're doing. Be 100% present with that experience. Don't just sit at your desk checking emails with a box of cookies and all of a sudden the box is gone. You won't even remember eating them, and they're having that experience is not even happening, right? So remove the distractions and just take a few minutes, if it even takes that long, to just like be present with the experience and taste and smell the thing that you're actually eating, the thing that you supposedly have been craving. Okay. We can enjoy or avoid sweets overload as well. So thinking about small doses. So a tricky problem with overeating sweets, or well, a tricky point of including them, especially from a place of feeling like you could never have them, is this, this freedom to say, okay, she told me I could include them, right? So you just kind of go like AWOL and eat a lot of them, right? This is again something that happens pretty commonly. So the optimal scenario of being able to take or leave sugar because you can have it any time, essentially. So if you've been restricting sweets for a while, it may take a little bit of time for you to allow that and become comfortable with that. But at a point, you'll be able to say, all right, I don't need to have the donut there. It doesn't even look that good anyway. And I can have another one whenever I want. So it's like not a big deal, right? You don't crave carrots this way, right? So why would you crave a donut that way, for example? So in the meantime, while you're working on this skill, single serve packs of things are really helpful. Okay. So having like a whole bag of cookies or just like a single serve pack of 3 or something like that, it's at least going to give you a natural stopping point. So you can say, all right, I was able to have it, like we're good. Right. And that you can keep a smaller amount in the house so that you don't have these urges to really just go crazy with them as well. The challenge is really allowing yourself to have a sweet when you're craving it as well. We do want to remember too the optimal pairings that we talked about. So when you're having a cookie, for example, instead of just having the thing that is really high in sugar, you could also have like a small handful of nuts or a piece of cheese or something with it. That's going to balance it out, give you a little bit more staying power in terms of your energy and your hunger for later, so that it's actually just part of a snack, essentially, right? And then you can certainly choose lower sugar or natural sugar options where it makes sense. I'm not a fan of artificial sweeteners. You can have your own opinion on that. But I find that if I want something sweet, I don't want a sugar alternative. It doesn't quite hit the spots like normal sugar does. But there may be some foods that are really high sugar that you're eating and you're not even noticing that it is. So things like lower sugar cereals, having plain yogurt and adding fruit or adding honey in there. Cottage cheese with fruit on the bottom has a lot of excess sugar in there, but if you were to do cottage cheese with adding your own fruit, you're saving a lot of that sugar as well. Creamers this time of year, so like the pumpkin spice creamers and things like that, have a lot of sugar already. So you may be able to skip adding the extra sugar in if you're having a product like that as well. And then watch the sodas and iced teas and things like that as well. Those are all really good simple swaps that you can make and likely not notice too much of a difference there as well. All right, let's talk about Lauren a little bit again. So in addition to working on her meal pairing and regulating the physical cravings of hunger, we also worked on that emotional aspect. Like I said, she really tied this to her self-worth, like most people do. Okay. So I began asking her why she was trying to avoid the donuts altogether. It's a good question. Which led to a familiar answer. I just cannot trust myself around them. Like once I get started, I just can't, right? So we chipped away at that thought pattern a little bit over time, but in the meantime, we used some of those allowance tips and we did like single serve cookies and things like that she'd have at home. And slowly she began to remove the guilt around it because she saw that she could have a little bit more control when she was having these things, and she could trust herself a little bit more. And then she was eventually able to even treat herself to having a donut once in a while without getting out of control, because we're putting all these balance things into place as well. So now she's at a point where she can buy sweets and keep them in the house, and a box of cookies can go stale before she realizes that she forgot about them, right? And that is ultimately where you want to be in terms of sugar cravings. It's just like being able to take it or leave it and not feeling like the cabinet is calling your name with these sugary items, right? And again, she lost about 30 pounds in 6 months because of working on some of these emotional things behind that. And I'm very proud of her for doing that as well. All right, so while it seems counterintuitive, I know it does, allowing sweets into your diet removes the guilt and that urgency to eat them, which in turn, in time, is going to make it easier for you to include them in your diet, stick with healthy eating more consistently, and not be subject to these binges on sugar as well. All right, key number 5, and the last thing that we're going to talk about is being picky about the sweets that you do include, right? So I said before that certain sweets in your favorite foods do trigger past memories. So you may, feel a certain way about the way that your mom made spaghetti and meatballs, or, Christmas cookies, for example, in my house were something that we would do at Christmas time, and it brings back a lot of fond memories as well. So, an optimal sweet tastes delicious in the present and reminds us of a fond memory, both of those things, okay? So that means that not all sweets are created equal, right? So if I were to say that one of my favorite Christmas cookies is the same as having a generic Oreo cookie, that's false, right? But if you're in this place where you're craving these sugars and you're feeling out of control with that, it doesn't matter. And if you can separate the two and be a little bit more picky about the types of sugars you include, it's going to be much easier to say no to certain things because they're not quite the same. They're not quite doing it for you. So setting a higher standard here. So if you're including all sweets in your diet, clearly this is going to be problematic because they're everywhere. And if you're just an equal opportunity eater in that case, it's going to be really hard to cut it back enough to reach your calorie goals, stay in your weight loss goals, stay in your healthy eating goals, etc. So we have to set the standard so you're not just eating everything in sight. You can actually enjoy the things that are coming into your diet, and you can limit portions by eating only as much as you enjoy. So mindfulness is really the key here. Okay. So remember that. If you don't, you're going to continue overeating them. We know that it's going to be hard to say no to things because you're just going to be going for all the things. And of course, it's going to be really hard to stay within your eating goals here too. So, like I said, mindfulness is really the key to the strategy here. So you have to be aware of what you're eating and the taste and the smell and the sensations that it leads to. Okay. With trial and error, you may realize that only certain sweets are actually worth your time and investment in. And this is a tough habit to break when you're really just sort of equal opportunity here. Now, every Halloween, I'll give you myself as an example here. We go trick-or-treating, and inevitably there are the candies that no one really wants to eat left at the bottom of the bag when all the good stuff has been eaten already. But if you're in this cycle of just like craving something sweet and wanting something sweet, everything is going to start tasting good to you no matter what, if you're not being mindful, right? So every year, and just example of how you need to be vigilant of training yourself on this is, I know that I don't like Whoppers, those little chocolate things with, I'm not even sure what it is in the middle, but essentially it reminds me of a mothball. And the idea of eating one just doesn't do it for me. It's actually slightly repulsive to me. But if I've had too much sugar and I know that there is something sweet in a Whopper, I will still eat it, right? You guys do this? Hopefully I'm not the only one that does this, right? And so, if you have these standards and you're eating it mindfully, you do get to this point where you decide like, oh, this chocolate is just subpar. Like it's not good. Whatever this filling is gross. I don't like it. Ultimately, it's not a very pleasurable experience. And so if you can say, all right, I had one of the Whoppers and it was gross, then you can not have any more of the Whoppers after that. And so just having this mindfulness around this, I think, is really key. A Snickers bar, on the other hand, is a different story. I will always like those, right? And so if you can learn to be a little bit picky about this and say, all right, we're going to a birthday party. I'm going to have a piece of the cake. I'm just going to take a bite of my daughter's cake and say, all right, that's really good, or, that's really gross. Like, and then decide if I want to have a whole piece from there. That's going to be creating these opportunities for you to be eating better more often, because you'll find that a lot of the sweets that are out there are just not as good as you like, or even as good as you remember. Maybe you had a favorite cookie when you were a kid and they changed the recipe, and all of a sudden it's only bringing you that emotional happiness and that reminiscence, but not the actual flavor in the present. Okay. We need to remember that. All right. So that's our 5 keys. And I know we're a little over time, but if you know me, that's how I roll, right? I should just say hour and a half. This is going to be. So what we talked about today, the one thing that is going to allow you to gain control of your eating habits here is this overarching goal of creating something sustainable and moderate, right? So that essentially means including all of your favorite foods in an effort to stop putting them on a pedestal, right? So if these sweets are something that you consider forbidden, the idea of having them becomes very very ideal, and it feels forbidden, and this idea that you're doing something wrong can be sort of appealing in some ways, right? And so if you kind of just normalize having all of these things as a long-term project, it helps you in every way, shape, and form. Okay. The 3 ways that your current habits are pushing you right at the candy bowl: balancing meals, waiting too long to eat, and not being picky about the things that you're including in your diet as well. Okay. Secret to balancing meals and reducing sugar cravings. We talked a lot about that. We talked about the meal timing piece with that as well. Not having a sugar or a sweet by itself, and trying to pair these things so that you're not getting into these cycles of these blood sugar spikes and then these immediate crashes and needing something again. That is really where you keep going for those sugars and how to pull yourself out of that. Okay. Now, I want to take this a little bit further. So the tools that we talked about tonight are very specific to dealing with sugar cravings. But if you've been struggling with weight loss for a while, you know that dealing with this one problem is not all it's going to take care, right? So I want to show you the 5 things that we really focus on in my programs. And when I'm working with clients one-on-one, it's really getting a good balance of all of these pillars here. And this is really a combination of, internal motivation and drive, understanding where you're going so that you can map out a plan to get there. We do want to include some basic things like eating well and exercising in here, but we also have to have a plan that we're confident in fulfilling, and having a mentor to help you along the way is really key to making all of that other stuff happen and helping you follow through, especially on those days that you say, I don't want to, right? Because they always happen, right? So once you can put all of that in there and have a well-rounded program, it's going to be much easier to hit your desired goal weight because you're working at these things consistently. You're not leaving out work in any of these weak spots that have maybe been holding you back in the past. And ultimately, you're going to have the freedom to eat whatever you want because you'll find ways to moderate them and fit it in and prove to yourself that you can still have a little bit of Halloween candy and continue losing weight or continue maintaining your weight, whatever the case may be. And ultimately, that time and energy to be present is really key here. So we're talking about, how you want your life to be as a whole, right? It doesn't have to be dictated by the diet that you're on. And if you're fueling your body and doing things that actually give you the energy and give you the space in order to enjoy your life, that is really something that you can't really get in another way, right? And ultimately, I want you to not have to diet ever again. If you're just figuring this out for yourself so you can moderate and be consistent and reach your goal, ultimately, you shouldn't need a coach long term, right? You shouldn't need to be sticking with somebody because you're not relying on them. You're getting these self-sufficient techniques being put in place here. So that's something that's really important to me with my clients as well. So two paths here, right? You can absolutely take the steps that we talked about here. You can better manage your sugar cravings, but ultimately in a few weeks, you may have done something like this before and you can forget these lessons and stop putting them into place. And if you're not really seeing progress because you're only doing a few of these tips, it's going to be hard to continue that. And it takes more than managing sweets intake. After all, we know that. So you have these two choices. You can continue doing what you've been doing. You can waste time working on only a part of that overall picture in hopes that it's the magic bullet to keep things going for you. Or you can really think about all of these things and put yourself on a fast track with your efforts and take the next step and begin working on all of these pillars so that you can reach that goal with ease and really reach that full potential there as well. So as I've mentioned, I do have a couple ways of working together. I am accepting a very small handful of one-on-one clients for virtual sessions. And I do also have a 12-week intensive weight loss program for women as well, which if you are on any sort of, busy schedule, which most women are at this point, having that flexibility in that schedule tends to work really well with that 12-week intensive. So we can certainly talk more about that. But that's really where it starts is, opening that conversation and chatting about some of the options that you have here as well. So I do invite you to book a call with me so that you can figure out where you are, figure out where you want to go, what's been holding you back, and really get clear on what you can be doing for the next few months as well. And so really, ultimately, I want you to be able to do this on your own. And I want to show you exactly how to do that, and create that sustainability as well. So we're not just coming in here and putting you on a keto plan and hoping that sticks and you're just somehow magically going to be able to stay on that. It's not going to happen, right? So I'm going to show you exactly how to create that sustainability in there as well. We're talking about a lot of emotional things and a lot of mindset issues that are happening in the background that do affect our ability to stay with a weight loss program in general. So we cannot forget about that piece of it. And really, if you're putting all these things into place and you're taking the steps and you're being open to the changes that can happen, you really are going to see some results, not only on the scale, not only in your body, but in the way that you're approaching this all together, just in the first couple of weeks as well. And of course, there is some accountability involved, this idea of getting started with things that maybe you have dreaded doing in the past, like getting started with exercise or, eating certain types of foods and things like that. There is going to be some accountability for trying new things and staying on that as well. But you're going to have my full support and my feedback and my guidance along the way so that you have the best effort at it as well. Okay. So if you are here live, I did put this in the chat box, this link, but I will be emailing it out to you as well so that you can go ahead and schedule that 15-minute call. If you do have any other questions as well in your follow-up email, you can also just hit reply and let me know that you're interested in scheduling. That works as well, especially if you cannot find a time on that calendar. We can certainly work together to find a time that works for both of us there. Okay. So thank you again for spending this hour and almost an hour and 15 with me. I hope now that you have a better idea of exactly what you'll need to do in terms of the sugar management, but also thinking more big picture and that sustainability piece for what you should be doing longer term, not only for weight loss, but healthier eating across the board as well. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day and we should talk soon.